Good morning, LinkedIn. Happy Thursday, May 23rd, 2024. Welcome to Let's Build Daily. I'm your host, Chris Carolin. Diving into part 2 today of trying to create a data map of HubSpot objects that includes Commerce Hub. It's not really anything out there right now. And for anybody enthusiastic about using Commerce Hub or helping other people use Commerce Hub, I think this is an important step. So figuring out how we can work together to create this common language foundation about what Commerce Hub is, what all the objects are doing and when, and all the nuance. Super important to start with some documentation like this, I think. So this is where we got yesterday. And just a quick review here, starting out with a form fill, let's say. We've got two cases here where if it's the traditional, form fill, I want to book a demo or something. Contact record gets created, creating a company record, usually at the same time. Maybe we're using the new lead object, and we've got that first before we do some qualification. Once qualified, we head into the deal record, where we add some line items that are based on the product library. So we're accessing some product records to help with that most of the time. I say most of the time, some portion of the time. The other portion is just putting in custom line items that do not move over to the product record or product library. From there, we can go a number of different ways where traditionally, and again, this is the impact of Commerce Hub. Traditionally, our only route to getting paid was a quote record that they could pay against. And between the quote record and the deal record, that's about where it ended in terms of visibility inside of HubSpot as to what happened. With Commerce Hub, we have access to payment links. We see payment records now. We see invoice records. We see subscription records. Order records, and the order object is in the system. Commerce Hub isn't necessarily taking ownership of that yet. It's owned by the strategic integrations team currently, because it's started out as support for Shopify, NetSuite, and Dynamics integrations. And with that, with the Shopify integration came carts as well. But finishing this process, once you have a deal and you have agreement from the buyer, you can either close via quote and get paid there. You can have verbal agreement and say, I like the quote. Now I'm ready to transact with you directly. And that could be via sending them an invoice, which is just turning the deal into an invoice with the line items on it. Being able to edit it as you do that. Or you can have some payment links ready, or turn the deal and the line items in it into a payment link. So we have three mechanisms. We've got subscriptions coming sometime soon, as far as not needing to execute off of these other off of a quote. Currently, if a recurring product gets paid for on a quote, it triggers a subscription record to be created alongside the payment record. And as I'm talking through this right now, continue to be reminded, and hopefully it's helpful to highlight, this is why line items is what it is and what we need it to be right now. We have multiple places and multiple stages where the line items can change, but they hit a wall in terms of whenever it's paid, it has to stay that way. It can't change anymore. And so this instantaneous, event of this is what we paid for, this is what we agreed to buy, needs to be set, right? And we can create a quote and adjust line items. We can create an invoice and adjust line items, and we can create payment links and adjust line items on that payment link. And as we do that, it doesn't necessarily make sense to link it back to the deal. So sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. And I just want to speak to the challenge of creating that flexibility that we all want, but then understanding that after the sale, we can't use that object for ongoing, evolving information and management of the data, right? It's not what it's built to do. And we don't want it to be built to do that in order to serve this pre-sales purpose. So that's one route, right? Let's say this analytics event happens to just be a purchase on an e-commerce shop. So we're creating the contact record, but on the way, we're going right to a cart record and an order record, right? Bypassing all this. And I think this, again, speaks to the challenge of providing this path, which requires no sales management at all. So we have sales management path up here, transactional self-service path down here, right? And I think this is why you're doing yourself a disservice if you don't fully understand what's available to you in the system, because HubSpot has to evolve the system to support these different use cases. So when you get surprised by things working differently, or don't understand why this new field or new view or new object is in your dropdown or wherever you see it, like, take a minute to explore instead of just saying, oh, not for me, right? Because most businesses have access to payment links, as an example, right now, and aren't using them, and could turn an hours long or days long transaction process that usually happens via email and via PDFs, could turn it into minutes. And it's just there. It's just sitting there. You don't have to pay for Commerce Hub. Obviously, if you set up HubSpot payments, just like any other online transaction service, there is a fee, with each transaction, but it's not different from, any other payment portal or online payment mechanism, right? So this is the high level. What we'd like to get to, or what I'd like to get to, is like what are we missing at this point to be able to tell the story of how the team works together in support of the customer journey, right? So I'm going to try to highlight and answer some of those questions today. And I'm betting I'll need a part 3 tomorrow. And we'll see how far we get. But just as so again, this is where I like to be if we're approaching from the perspective of we don't know what we don't know, what things do we know that can help us ask the right questions and figure out where we might go next, right? And that's where we can look at, more traditional versions of what we're trying to accomplish, which is what we have, here in this past, ERD, right? We can look at things like, process maps here to help us understand the what and the when and the how of all this, right? And we can look at, we have a newer, updated version from Ian Shields here that goes into various details a little bit more. And he's agreed to work with me on this, and I'm excited to do it because we both agree that there needs to be more information. But then we also have the work that HubSpot is doing. And while I understand why there's a need to solve for this in app, I do think we need to get to an agreeable place as far as documentation, is concerned underneath. And one would think that if they're building some of this stuff behind the scenes, that there's some maps that exist to help them do that. And at the end of the day, they have way more details than we do. So what can we look at inside the portal with the stuff that they're working on? And we have the data model management screen. And so if we look at what is available here, as we click on, the contacts box, right, it starts to show us relationships. It starts to show us association labels. So that is something we might want to get involved in the diagram somehow. If we click on view details here, right, we have usage, properties, associations, used in. So I think properties is definitely somewhere I want to get to, and you have it, in diagrams like this where we have to have a certain number of properties existing to even have the object created in the first place. But I'm very interested in going a little bit beyond, required, in terms of functionally required versus strategically required to move forward with the right objects at the right time. And then we have used in. So this is where we've got workflows and views and forms and lists and all the other assets in HubSpot, which are starting to be referred to as objects, which brings us back here when we have our, marketing campaigns, lists, workflows, HubSpot users. How does ownership come into play with all these objects? Who owns what, when? We can actually show, and I think it's valuable to show object relationships in those moments, because from there we'll show okay, if this is the person that owns it, what does their view need to look like, right? What data did they need to see? If they need to see data from an object that is not currently associated to this object, then we need to make an association. Can we do it in a meaningful way that's not going to confuse, right? Do we need to create a sync property or a workflow to copy the data over to this object, or can we just make an association instead and have it show up on a card on the record, right? So I think, and the only other thing that I would love to see here is we don't have pipelines, I don't think, showing up anywhere, right? And that is a layer that I'm very interested in solving, how we, display that in relationship, to the map, not dissimilar from, kind of how we break it out here, because that's where it, and like, one of the places we would do that first is the difference between a sales, managed deal situation and a much more transactional situation, right? And then we're asking questions like, if they just do everything themselves, we don't even have a deal pipeline, and it just creates an order. Like, or do we need a deal pipeline for some reason? What we want to avoid in the future, now that we have all these spaces, and this is where it starts to impact how we've been doing things in the past a great deal. And the Shopify transition is a great example, is the example, because originally the integration was connected and creating deals, right? And you had a deal that had a pipeline. So it was one pipeline in your deals. It was the e-commerce pipeline. And there was a stage. There was like a stage related to carts. So like abandoned cart. And it would create a deal. When they updated it last year, they switched to creating orders, which makes sense practically. But now all of our revenue reporting that is built on deals forces us to create deals, create closed won deals based on an order happening. So the only reason we're creating the deal is for reporting purposes at that point. And I think those are the places we want to move away from if we can. Like if the deal object is built for sales management and it's getting created at closed won, something is off, right? And even though you're in that case, let's say in the Shopify case, we're creating it for, the revenue reporting purposes. At that point, we got to start filtering those deals out, because we have no idea, what the sales cycle length was, right? And it starts messing with all these metrics, because we know that, like, if we're trying to use the system, with any sort of integrity, we don't like it when our sales guys or our sales admins, do everything prior to closed won, but don't add anything to the system until it is closed won. So let's not create more situations where that's forced upon us. And that's where, as the product moves forward so fast, we've got to try and solve for things like that, so we don't put the users in a position to do that, but we can also, move forward. I see a lot of these things as small steps in a very, very large journey towards customer platform. But we got to start connecting those dots about, okay, this is an order. What is it supposed to be? What is it supposed to represent? What is its superpower, right? In HubSpot terms of native objects. Celine mentions, pipelines functionally being a property couple here. I think I know what you mean, but if you could maybe explain a little more what you mean there, that would help me. So how do we add all this stuff? And again, why? Why do we need to add all this stuff? And this is where I know I'm in the minority on this whole keep it simple narrative that frustrates me to no end, and I believe is a large part of the why we are here, where people aren't using CRMs, people are unable to digitally transform. The why, in my opinion, is that we need to make CEOs and other leaders, but definitely CEOs, aware of the resources required to administrate and execute a successful HubSpot platform instance. They don't know what that is right now. And because of that, we have accidental admins. We have people forced to manage HubSpot in a way where they don't have the resources they need. They don't have the buy-in they need. And it just creates, it's a recipe for failure. And failure has been the outcome in way too many, in the majority of cases where people are trying to use CRM for their business, I'd say. So if we hide behind keep it simple, it becomes an impossibility for the CEO who might not understand fully, digital transformation and like the intangibility of it, right? It's not like a product line where we can see products being created, we can hold it in our hands. When something breaks, we see it, we can touch it, we can feel it, right? When data goes bad, lots of various issues can pop up. And if you don't know where it's going bad, why it's going bad, who's inputting it, and the process they're following to input it, what you end up with is cases where the leader says, oh, I like the idea of a client portal. I like that Amazon experience. I like to know when my stuff is shipping. So why don't we do that? Let's build a client portal. And then you run into the fact that the normal process for shipping, let's say, since our ISO program only requires us to review our shipping integrity, our shipping metrics once a month or once a quarter, at least, I hope. That's when we make sure all the shipping dates are in the system in prep for that review, in prep for that audit. Because if I'm likely a shipping guy that's overwhelmed and I'm shipping out tons of stuff every day, I'm going to find things like that aren't required to get my job done. And nobody has told me that it's a must requirement for doing my job until it comes audit time, until it comes monthly review time. So that's when it gets put in. If I want a client to be able to log in to a portal and see their ship date real time, that process has to change. And there is training involved, both for the person inputting the data and the manager of that person, about why we need to make this update. Do we have the right tools? How difficult is it to put in the ship date, right? If it's more difficult than it needs to be, maybe we can start putting it in HubSpot instead, because it's real easy to do that. And now we can easily put it on a portal. It's easier to maintain it there than it is to be buried in your ERP. Right? We can't get to those questions until we connect those dots for the CEO. And I've learned very quickly, like, if the CEO's responsibility is to resource the organization for growth and success, they've got to understand all the resources required to do that. And if you're not telling the whole HubSpot story, so long story longer, we are trying to tell a HubSpot story here that can connect those dots in a meaningful way, right? Which is where we get to, with one of the first iterations of this, which is where we start to, apply the customer journey and what the customer wants to see and which properties, they care about, when they care about them, but also internal customers, right? How many times does a process fall through the cracks where we need to say, hey, you didn't put the piece of data in. Like, can you just tell me what it was and I'll put it in? Like, thanks. And just remember next time, right? They're not going to remember, right? And they're not intentionally misremembering. They're busy, right? They might only hit that specific point once a week, but it happens to impact this person every single time. They miss it, right? So dealing with all this is very difficult if you don't create this story, right? So the first thing I want to do is, like, again, keep the customer, front and center, like that customer journey, right? And we start to just apply it. And I'm gonna bring it in here, right? And we'll move it down a little bit, get it out of the way. Right. So ultimately, if we can get to this context, right, and we're just looking for framing and anchors that we can come back to over and over to make sure we're all speaking the same language, we're speaking from the right place, right? The more time, like, without these things, we inevitably will get confused. Are you talking about from the shipper's perspective or from the manager's perspective, right? Is it the customer that purchased, or is it the customer that's installing the product, or is it the customer that's receiving the product? Another example that I just have to mention, where you think you're doing a great thing by maybe not keeping track of this as much as you should, and all of a sudden the ship date moves up a week, and you're like, hey, the customer is gonna get it early. If I was the customer, I would be so happy. Like, I know that they weren't happy about this initial lead time of 5 weeks, and now it's gonna be 4 weeks. If that's like a sophisticated, probably doesn't even have to be that sophisticated, right? From the customer's perspective, don't surprise us when it comes to like transactional expectations. And maybe that's not the right adjective there, transactional, but like the things that are most important, let's say logistical expectations. Maybe that's a good way to put it. If I am a receiver or a logistics manager and I have to manage a shipping dock, a receiving dock, If you surprise me with a shipment, that ruins my day. Like, in a lot of cases, maybe not every time. But if I've got to manage people coming in and coming out of this receiving area, and you surprise me with, like, let's say a $500,000 piece of equipment that requires a lot of coordination to make sure I have the right staff, I have the right partners in place to receive it, unbox it, commission it, whatever, you've just wrecked my day. So that's where putting your internal team in a place to easily communicate these things, right? Because you might have done a lot of scrambling to get it out earlier and added a lot of cost into the process, and now everybody's unhappy, right? So creating these spaces of just anchors and speaking from the right perspective, the same perspective, asynchronous communication that can be counted on is so important. So we add this customer journey perspective, and I'm just gonna copy this, little Control D action, bring it down, and get rid of this for now. And we'll bring this analytics event over here. And we got, let's say, contact record. Right. But honestly, once they highlight, who they are, they're probably, hey, over here, let's straddle this a little bit. And we've got the hand raiser. So at that point, their lead. Once we realize it's high intent, then we've got the deal record, and we're moving them through the opportunity. So we've got the quote. We are figuring out, line items to be quoted, got payment links, and then they become a customer. And this is where we have, the payment records, subscription records, invoice records. Got our deliverables down here. And we've got our tickets, which really, again, could show up anywhere in the process. I'll leave it here for now. Our carts, in theory, could be out here a little bit, right? Especially if we're likening them to like the analytics event that triggers things in our system. All right, we've got, it's going to clean this up a little bit. And we'll continue to clean it up. But as soon as you can apply this perspective, and of course, this is what's so easy to miss, and most businesses miss it. What does our internal process need to look like? I mean, especially RevOps admins and CRM admins, you're relying on your internal users to tell you what they need. And it's very easy for them to miss this piece. So it's okay, I need a deal. I need to be able to create the quote record at this time with this stuff on it. And as an admin, you're okay, to create the quote, you need to add all these line items, and you need to input all this data. so that we can have it for reporting purposes, when in reality, I'll just drag the company record over here too. Like if they filled out the form on a specific product page, we can already have a ton of information understood and being transferred to the deal, and even the line items, right? Automatically adding line items to a deal because they filled out the form on that specific line item product page on the website. So now our sales team doesn't have to fill in all the information. They have to check it and maybe make some tweaks based on the conversation they've been having. But you start to understand what the customer is doing and the behavior from their journey can add so much enrichment to the CRM and the records, but also just open up so much time. Now, this is not easy to execute by any means, but the hardest part is just understanding that you could leverage that. I'd say the second hardest is picking the right system to do that, which most systems, like especially when you take into account CMS plus CRM and HubSpot, it's one of the few platforms that have both, right? And when they're so close together, you can use that behavior to add data to your system once you are confident that that's what the behavior is signaling, right? And of course, we do some version of this with lead scoring, right? Did they watch the video? Did they check out this blog? Did they join this webinar? Right? But that is like higher up in the process. Like if we have a hand raiser come in and I want this thing and I want to talk to sales right now, we could have so much data automatically input into the CRM which leads to quicker response times. Because sometimes we ask for so much. We ask the sales team for so much to do a quote. That's what leads them to say, hey, you put in this custom line item. It's in the product library. Like, why aren't you using that one? It's like, well, there's a huge list of things to choose from. And I don't remember our name. I don't remember our naming scheme. I know what I call it. I know what I've been calling it for 10 years. And you just added this crazy like coding scheme to support your configure price quote tool that you just added to the system. And I don't have time for that. You haven't even trained me on it. So I'm going to type in the custom line item and we'll take care of it later, because I know that if I get back to this customer very quickly, I have a better chance of getting the sale. So don't make me do all that work, because I'm not going to do it. If I think it's going to get in my way to getting the sale, I am less likely to do it. That doesn't mean you create all these 15 property requirements to get the quote out the door, because that just forces me into other channels like email, and I'll just quote the price via email and I'll get the verbal. I'll finish the transaction with the customer and then ask somebody else on our team to take that email and get it done in the CRM, because that's the definition of having to work for the CRM instead of the CRM working for me. It is impossible for you to make those connections to understand that nuance if you don't have maps, if you don't start mapping stuff like this against the internal user experience and the external user experience. And the last note on that, like to that end, if the customer is super interested, if the buyer is super interested, like, and there's enough data to support at this point. Like once you have them locked in, if you know that they're interested, they're willing to give you information if they believe it will help them get help faster, get a better deal, get value, right? So you don't need this, I need a demo right now because I want to buy form to be 3 properties. Because when it's only 3 properties, now you're running them through a qualification process that they already did themselves on the website. So now you're putting them in a worse position. You're putting the salesperson in a worse position. Heaven forbid you throw a SDR in there to make it even worse and take longer. And all this friction you're adding at that point, after the form, where you thought like, hey, I need to remove friction. Here's how I'm going to do it. Right? All the extra friction that creates because you didn't give them an opportunity to clarify their wants, needs, desires, risks the sale. Especially when you set the expectation that they're going to be able to transact quickly, like buy now buttons that lead to a quote or something like that. Like that's bait and switch, and they're not having it. They might be forced to do it now in a lot of spaces, but more and more people are learning how to do this from an organizational perspective. And if you wait to start to provide these experiences to your customers, I really think the clock is ticking. And I don't think you want to find out what happens if somebody else does it before you. So this simple layer, this one layer, right? And already I guarantee people would tell me that this is, reaching complexity that's not necessary, right? And whenever I hear that, if you're going to tell me that, just know every time right now, I'm going to respond with, well, why do we have such an adoption problem with CRM? Why do most ERP projects fail the first time? Why are 70% of digital transformations failing? It's because we aren't telling the story of what's required to do it. And since we aren't telling that story, CEOs and leaders are researching the vast web to learn the horror stories of other people and all the baggage out there, or to find the quick win deals that are anything but, and they're just exacerbating the problem. So we got to do better here. We'll continue this conversation tomorrow. And honestly, I don't know how many parts we're going to end up with here. I kind of just go down the path that I feel like is important. As we talk about it, I'm the guy that probably likes way too much context, but without that context, like I'm just challenging, everybody right now. Instead of starting with less context, start with more and come back. Instead of starting simple, start complex and scale it back. Figure out where that line is. If we start simple and we start with little context, that might be easier to get started, but we're not seeing progress towards complexity. We're seeing complacency. We're seeing settling. We're seeing unsuccessful implementations. So why would we keep doing that? So I hope this is helpful. Obviously, I'm enjoying it. Really passionate about this stuff. Always curious, open to feedback and experiences that you may or may not have, with this stuff. So as we move through, find the opportunity for feedback, share the opportunity you've seen. And overall, as a group, we can find this opportunity to get better, to tell a better story, and to help leaders grow their organizations. Have a great day, everybody.